And I, growing up as a lad, on the banks of the Saskatchewan, I learned the ways of my mother. I learned the ways of the native peoples. I learned how to survive in the woods. I learned how to eat. I learned how to shoot center. I learned how to skin beavers. And I learned the ways of the Northwest Company. I learned the ways of that big organization, big system of getting beaver furs here. Here. 'Twas I, Jacco, on the banks of Bow River. Y'all, way back, 200 years, it was I, Jacco, wiped out them Blackfeet that were charging that fort. On the Bow River, I feared nobody. I, Jacco, 3 wives, 14 children, feared nobody. I had my own family of trappers, my own family of voyagers. I had my own family. We were big. We had to be to protect ourselves. Jacco, I, Jacco, Raphael Findlay. I am a trapper and a trader for the Northwest Company. And you two are late.
David Thompson, map maker. What a title. It made my David seem like such a shallow man. What did David Thompson do? Oh, he made maps. Yes. My David made maps. And he was very good at it, too. But there was much more to my David than just his maps. My David was a good man, a strong man. Unlike most of the other voyageurs who thought of nothing but the task at hand, my David, he liked to look at everything. He noticed the flowers, the trees, the animals, and the people. My David loved people. He liked to know about their customs, what they ate, what they believed. He wanted to know why they did things the way they did. He lived with the native people many times during his life. And he always wanted to know more. He was always thirsty for knowledge. But here I'm talking about David, and I haven't even told you about myself. My name is Charlotte Small. I was born in a fort, Fort Ile-à-la-Crosse. My father, Patrick Small, was the factor there, and my mother was a Cree woman. My older sister Nancy, my younger brother Patrick, and I, we were raised in the fort. When I was just 5 years old, my father left. And my mother became the wife of the next factor. The year I was 12, my sister married our father's cousin, John MacDonald of Garth. She got into the canoe. They paddled away, just like that. There was no marriage ceremony. If a man needed a wife and a woman agreed to go, they were married. Well, that same fall, I saw David Thompson for the first time. He was different than the others. He was studious. Most of the men, as they were canoeing in, you could hear them far before you could see them. Oh, rala, mabula, rala. Oh, rala, mabula. And as soon as they hopped onto shore, they said, "Ooh, el rum." All they wanted was their rum. But not my David. He didn't much care for the rum. Unlike most of the traders who traded as much rum as all the other trade goods put together, David almost refused to bring it with us. When the company forced him to bring it, David would pack it on the wildest pack horse. You saw how those pack horses are packed. Well, he'd pack it on the wildest one, and before we took our first rest stop, that rum would be smashed to smithereens. Rum had a terrible effect. All the alcohol. So many lives were ruined by it. And it wasn't just the men. I saw one drunk woman drag her husband right through the fire by his hair. Oh, that evil, evil rum. But not my David. My David, he didn't like the rum. On Sundays, if possible, he would do a church service. He told me he'd marry me in the church one day. I didn't mind. I knew he'd never leave me. He was my husband. But we traveled all across this country. The first time we got together was Grand Portage. We got into that canoe. Where's my paddle? We stepped into that canoe and we went down the river. It was spring, we were traveling quickly. When we crossed the lakes, the water would lap gently on the side of the canoe. But other times we were in the rapids and we were fighting wildly to make sure we weren't dashed on the rocks. Nothing makes your heart sing quite like knowing that one false move could dash you on the rocks. The rhythm of the paddle has a heartbeat all of its own. Once you know that rhythm, you miss it. You crave it. It becomes part of who you are. We traveled from Grand Portage to Fort George our first winter. And at Fort George, many of the men, they wintered out and trapped on their own. And then we went back to a new fort, because Grand Portage was too far south. So we had to go to the new fort. And we got there before Nancy and John. So I got the opportunity to be the tour guide this time. And I showed Nancy all around the fort. And a few weeks later, back in the canoes, all the way across the country, right to what were called the Rocky Mountains. I'd never seen a mountain. I was born in Fort Eli La Crosse on the prairie. We had molehills, I guess you could call them. But we certainly didn't have mountains. And the closer we got, they seemed so huge. I couldn't get over how big they were. I felt hemmed in. I felt trapped. But Rocky Mountain House was so beautiful. It had high walls and there was corner gun towers for people to look out. And the first day we got there, I said, I'm going to go get some berries. The berries are right down by the river. And David said, no, Charlotte. You're not going anywhere without me. You have to have me or one of the men with you. Because the Piegan people do not want us to cross the mountains. They've been enjoying their position of middleman for many years. They don't want us to cross. What a nuisance. All my life I'd enjoyed my freedom, and here I had to stay in the fort. And of course it was winter then, so we couldn't go out much anyway. And the next spring, while David and his men were packing up the canoes and getting everything all ready to go, I just had to stand there and smile and wave, because I was expecting our first child. I couldn't go on a rough canoe ride for many weeks, possibly months. So I smiled and waved goodbye as David and the men got in their canoes and went across the Rocky Mountains. Here I was, 15 years old, about to have my first child, and all alone. Well, I wasn't all alone. There were some men in the fort, but no other women. Well, the local chief, he heard of my problem, and he said, I'll send my wives to you. Can you imagine my surprise when 6 women walked through the door? The chief had 6 wives. 3 about my mother's age and 3 about my age. Well, with all these wonderful women, I was totally comfortable. And on June 10th, 1801, my darling little Fanny was born. 2 weeks later, down the river came David and the men. The guide that he had hired was a charlatan. He was a complete liar. He'd never been across the mountains. He led them on a wild goose chase to a snow-packed valley, and they had to turn back. I know that David and his men, they were disappointed not to be going across the mountains. But secretly, I was relieved to have my David home with me.